As I'm sure most of you are aware by now, Bernie Sanders made an amazing appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast a couple of days ago. I posted a video about it yesterday, and in that video I talked about the discussion that Joe and Bernie had around legalizing all illicit drugs in the United States. Well, right now I want to talk about another great part of the conversation that they had. This time, it's from when they were talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now, those of you who are familiar with Joe Rogan and who've watched his podcast over the years, or listened to his podcast over the years, you know that Joe has been kind of all over the place on the issue of raising the minimum wage. He's had some right-wing kook, lunatic economists like Peter Schiff come on his show repeatedly and make arguments not against raising the minimum wage. Peter Schiff will literally argue against having a minimum wage at all. And Joe Rogan sits there mostly in agreement with him and egging him on, not really pushing back. So I'm not 100% sure where Joe Rogan stands on the issue of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. But my guess would be he's not in favor of it. Well, at least until he had this conversation with Bernie Sanders. Joe Rogan hit Bernie Sanders with some of the goofiest right-wing talking points against raising the minimum wage. And Bernie Sanders did a masterful job slapping it down and really putting into perspective how important it is to raise the minimum wage. And all these right-wing talking points, they don't stand up to even the most mildest scrutiny. So I have the clip. It's a little bit longer than 2 minutes, about 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Show you the clip, and then we'll come back and I'll break it down.
Let's go with the minimum wage thing. Now, the argument that I've heard about the minimum wage being raised to $15 an hour is that they're entry-level positions for high school kids, for people that are just getting their feet wet in the marketplace. They're learning how to work. They're making some money after school. That if you charge, or if businesses have to pay $15 an hour to people like that, to entry-level people, that they won't be able to stay open.
Well, first of all, they will be competing against, if you're a business and I'm a business, and both of us have to raise our wages at the same level, we both have the same burden, so it's spread across. That is what my conservative colleagues will tell you. The truth is, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, that while it certainly is true that young people do work at McDonald's and the minimum wage jobs, a significant and majority of the workers are not kids. They are often, and I've met them at McDonald's, they are workers who have children themselves. When we work very hard to raise the minimum wage at Amazon and at Disney, we put pressure on both of those companies, and they did the right thing. And when you talk to the people at Amazon who got that raise, these are not kids. These are people in their 30s. These are ordinary adults who cannot make it on $12 or $13 an hour. So I think the argument that, they're all kids, is not really quite accurate.
Well, not even that they're all kids, but that if they are kids, what would you think about making a minimum wage for someone who's under 18 that's different from a minimum wage for someone who's a legal adult?
I'm not for that. I think we do it, and look, many of these young people have their own needs. I just talked to a young woman last night who is going to college, working full-time, trying to take care of her family as well. So I think, look, the minimum wage has not been raised in 10 years. It is now $7.25 an hour, which is clearly unacceptable. The cost of housing, California, all over this country, is rising fairly rapidly. People can't afford health care, can't afford college. I don't think it's asking our employers too much to pay at least $15 an hour minimum wage.
So I think Bernie did a great job there disproving this idea that all the people who work at these minimum wage and low wage jobs are teenagers, 18 and 19-year-olds who are looking for pocket change. And he also knocked down Joe Rogan's silly proposition for a compromise, saying, okay, maybe not all low wage workers are teenagers, but maybe we can pay the teenagers not a living wage. So he's basically trying to get Bernie to be like, okay, we'll pay the adults a living wage, but the kids no. And Bernie wasn't having it. He explained how teenagers have expenses too. Teenagers are in over the head at paying bills and all that stuff. So they need to be paid a living wage just like anybody else. And regardless of your age, you are a worker, you are producing something of value for the corporation. So your age has nothing to do with it. Your labor is worth a living wage. So Bernie did a good job making that point. Now, my only criticism of Bernie's answer there is that he kind of let slide the overall idea that these corporations can afford to pay their workers $15 an hour, a living wage. And I think he would have made his point even stronger if he brought up the statistics of our economy and just busted up that whole myth about these multi-billion-dollar corporations not being able to pay their workers a living wage. So since Bernie didn't do it, I'll do it right now. Wages in the United States have been stagnant since the 1980s. So the cost of living has gone up, everything from rent, groceries, education, utilities, household bills like phone bills. All of that stuff has gone up since the 1980s, but wages have not kept up with inflation. So they've been stagnant since the 1980s. Now, it'd be one thing if wages were stagnant and also productivity was stagnant and there was no real difference in how much money is being made here in the United States by these corporations. But that's not the case. What actually is happening is productivity has gone through the roof. Corporations and companies are making more money now than they've ever made at any time in human history. And that money is not being distributed in a reasonable way. And that manifests in all of these crazy statistics that you guys hear all the time. Back in the 50s, the CEO to worker pay ratio was 20-1. So the average CEO made as much as 20 of his workers. I don't think that's unreasonable. I really don't. Some people to my left might say that's still too much. That's still way more than the workers. I mean, we can have that discussion, but that's in theory, because where we are right now is so far from that. The worker to pay ratio has gone from 20-1 in the 1950s to 361-1 here in 2019. That is outrageous. All that money, and mind you, wages have been stagnant since the 80s. So all that money that they're taking, all the money that these corporations are making, is going straight to the executives, the CEO, and the board members. And the workers, the people who are actually doing the work on the ground, get the crumbs and get starvation wages. So Joe and Bernie brought up McDonald's. So let's talk about McDonald's. The CEO to worker pay ratio in McDonald's is 3,100-1. The CEO made, in 2017, 3,100 times the average salary of his McDonald's employee. And the actual numbers are $21,761,000 compared to the average worker that makes $7,000 at McDonald's annually. So this is highway robbery. I'm not even done yet. The Walton family, so the heirs to the Walmart fortune, the 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune have more wealth than the bottom 40% of the country combined. So 6 people have more wealth than almost half the country. There are over 300 million people who live in the United States. For 6 people to have more wealth than about 120 million, 110 million of them combined, that is outrageous. That is scandalous. And Walmart is some of the worst offenders when it comes to paying their workers slave wages. Walmart knows they're screwing their employees so bad that when employees are doing their new hire paperwork, so when they just get hired, Walmart gives them food stamp applications and housing assistance applications to apply for, because they know, Walmart knows damn well they're not going to be paying these workers enough to pay their bills and live a decent life. They're going to be paying them slave wages, and they know it. And at the same time they're doing that, the 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune have more wealth than the bottom 40% of the country combined, over 100 million people. So when Joe Rogan and other people try to make the argument that we can't raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is a living wage, because all these corporations, they're going to run out of money and they're not going to be able to keep their doors open and they're going to fire a bunch of people and close businesses. That is silly. And my counterpoint to that would be, if they can't do it now with record profits, got corporations making billions of dollars in profit every year, if now they can't pay their workers a living wage, then when can they? And that is a question they cannot answer. That is a question nobody can answer, because I just explained to you how these executives, these CEOs, they're running out the back door with all the money. We're making record profits, more money than has ever been made before in human history. And people are still going to come out and say, oh, nope, we can't afford to pay the workers a living wage. So you're never going to be able to pay the workers a living wage. Would corporations, McDonald's, I forget how many billions of dollars they make in profit. Let's just say it's $10 billion they made in profit. I'm sure it's more than that. Are you going to tell me that they can't afford to pay their workers a living wage until they make, $20 billion in profit? Like, that argument is so unserious. It's so silly. And when people make this argument that corporations can't afford to pay their workers a living wage, a lot of the times I don't even get mad at them. Like, I'm not even mad at Joe Rogan for making those stupid points, because this gets back to what the main problem is, and it is the rank corporate propaganda in the United States. From the time we can understand words, we're indoctrinated with this pro-corporate propaganda, which is supply-side economics. And basically what this idea of supply-side economics is that above everything else, everyone's top concerns when you're looking at the economy and trying to make changes in the economy, the first priority, the first order of business is making sure these corporations can make as much money as possible. To make sure that these executives can make as much money as possible. And it's all over the place, the supply side economics. They teach it in grade schools. A lot of these corporations, they have these giant conflicts of interest where they have financial ties to professors and economists, and then these professors and economists go out and teach in colleges. All they teach is supply side economics. What can we do to most benefit the corporations? That's what they're teaching in school. They definitely, on corporate media, that's all they talk about, mainstream media. Their only view of the world, the only view of economics that they have is supply side economics. How do we benefit the corporations? That propaganda, that nonstop propaganda, it manifests itself in people just like you see in Joe Rogan right there. I've seen people that I know, people in their 20s, try to make the argument that corporations can't afford to pay workers a living wage. That shit hurts me. I'm not even mad at them. I'm mad for them, because that's a failure of our entire education system. That's a failure of our media. That's a failure of the politicians. Because, and trust me, I get it. I've lived in Florida. I spent most of my life in Florida. I've grew up in Florida. One of the most Republican states in the country, super right-wing Christian fundamentalist. I understand what it's like to be indoctrinated with right-wing propaganda. So I get it. But what I really need people to start doing is, when you get that thought, that propaganda bubble just pops up in your head, that idea that's been implanted in your head a million times throughout your life. So when it pops into your head, like when you hear workers aren't getting paid enough to pay their bills, they're not getting anywhere near enough to pay rent, put food on the table, keep the lights on, and all of that stuff. When you hear that, your reaction would be, and you know how much these corporations are making, your reaction would be, oh, why don't we just make them pay the workers more? Because that's obviously the logical solution. But what that corporate propaganda, that supply side economics bullshit propaganda does to people, it makes them, the very next thought in their head, oh wait, they can't do it because we have to look out for the corporations. They can't afford it. The corporations can't afford it. Yeah, McDonald's making billions of dollars in profit. They still can't afford to pay their workers a living wage. I get it that you can't control that second thought from popping into your head because that's what's been drilled in your head your whole life. But what I need people to start doing is you need to question that thought. When that thought pops up, you have to ask yourself, wait, why am I thinking that? People can't afford to feed their kids. That reigns supreme over McDonald's needing to make an extra $1 billion in profit this year. There's someone who's working and can't afford a roof over their heads for their kids. That is more pressing. That problem needs to be fixed before we worry about giving an extra $1 billion or $2 billion to the Walton family. So when you think about raising the minimum wage and that thought pops up, we can't do it because of corporations, you need to ask yourself, why am I so worried about the corporations? Why do I care so much about these CEOs who don't care about their workers, they don't care about me? Why am I so worried about their profits and making sure that they get to live in the top 1% as they are right now? You ask yourself, who is this opinion benefiting? Who is this line of argument benefiting? It is not benefiting the workers. It is not benefiting the people who need to put food on the tables for the kids. It's not benefiting the people who are working and still can't afford a roof over their heads. The only people that line of argument is benefiting are the extremely wealthy corporate elites, the executives, the people who have already made millions of dollars and don't have to worry about anything for the rest of their life. That's the only people who the argument, oh, well, we can't raise the minimum wage because corporations, they can't afford it. That's the only people that argument benefits. So I need people, when that idea pops in their head, that propaganda bubble pops into their head, just question it. Just question it. Does this make sense? Look into it. How can they not afford it if they're making record profits at the moment? This was an important conversation for Bernie Sanders to have on Joe Rogan's podcast because, like I said, Joe Rogan's been on his show doing bullshit around the minimum wage for years, having Peter Schiff come on talking about we shouldn't even have a minimum wage. And a lot of Joe Rogan's audience are right-wingers who believe that shit. So for Bernie Sanders to come there and succinctly make the case that, no, we need to be paying workers a living wage, it was great. And I just wish that he added in how outrageous the corporate profits have been over the last few years to really drive the point home to Joe Rogan's audience that, oh no, wait, this whole idea that they can't afford it, that's nothing but corporate greed and propaganda to manufacture consent among the people to allow corporations to continue to rip us off unabated.